Hey, what is going on, everybody? It is Rob, aka The Diligent Dev, and welcome back to part 2 in the series where we're going to create a REST API with Azure Functions, Node.Js, and Azure Table Storage. In our first video, we set up our table storage account, and we also implemented our first API request to create a blog post. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to implement 2 GET requests, one to get all posts for a blog, another to get a specific post. We're also going to implement an update post and a delete post. So without any further ado, let's jump over to the computer and get right into it. Okay, so here we are over the computer, and I have our project from part 1 up on the screen. And what we're going to do is work on a method to get all posts. So we'll head over to the Azure extension, and then we're going to go to the Functions tab and click this little lightning bolt with a plus sign. We're going to select HTTP trigger, and then we're going to call this one get posts. We will set it to anonymous, and now we have our function code up on the screen. The first thing we're going to do is head over to our new folder for get posts, and we're going to go into this function.json, and inside of here we only want the get method, so we're going to remove this post. And then right under that, let's remove this comma. Right under that, we're going to create a new property and call it route. And then we're going to set this to, let's get rid of this, get posts slash and then brackets and blog. Now, if you remember from the first video in this series, we set our partition key as blog. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this URL, pass in the name of the blog that we're looking for. In our case, it was Diligent Dev in the first video. So that way we get all the posts for a specific blog. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that. Next, we're going to head over to services and our table service. And right underneath insert entities, we're going to create another method, and we're going to say const query entities. And we're going to pass it a table name and a query. And then since the Azure SDK returns a callback function, we're going to wrap this in a promise so we can use async await. So we're going to say return new promise. We'll do our resolve and reject. And then inside of here, we will actually use the SDK. So we're going to say table service dot query entities. We're going to pass in the table name. Actually, I'm just going to hit tab. We're going to pass in the table name, the query. We're also going to pass in some options here. So the option that we're going to pass in is payload format. And that's going to be set to application/JSON, semicolon, and then OData equal to no metadata. And basically what this is going to do is the same thing it did up here. So it's going to strip out all that metadata that we saw in the first video. And then if we get an error, we're going to reject it with the error. And if we don't, we're going to resolve with the body. So let's head back to our index.js and go ahead and get rid of all this stuff. Up at the top, we're going to import Azure because we're going to use it later. So we're going to say const Azure equals require Azure storage. And then we're also going to pass in our query entities. And that's coming from up1 services/table service. Down here, we'll wrap everything in a try catch. I'm going to move this context res. Actually, I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to put that up there. I'm going to put another one in here. We will change the status of this one to 500. Go ahead and get rid of this comment. And then as the body, we will pass it error.message. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this context res. So right inside the try block, we're going to say var query equals new Azure table query, and then we're going to say where partition key EQ question mark, and then not post, but we're going to pass in the blog. So first we need to grab that actually. So I'm going to say const blog equals, and when you pass it in, it's going to be under the binding data. So we'll say context dot binding data dot blog. And I missed a D here. So what we're doing is grabbing the blog from the URL that we're passing in, and then we're going to set the second parameter inside of our query equal to that. So it's going to do a new Azure table query where the partition key is equal to, and this question mark is going to be replaced with the blog. And then we'll say const result equals await query entities. We're going to pass in the posts, and then we're going to pass in our query that we set up here. Down here, we can actually get rid of this because it's going to default to a 200. And then we'll set the body equal to the result. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Then we'll head over to our debug tab, and we're going to go ahead and launch our development server. And we see now we should have two different functions. So we have our create post and our get post. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the get. I'm going to go over to Thunder Client. You can also use Postman or Insomnia, create a new request. And then what we're going to do is paste this in. I'm going to replace the blog with diligent dev. And then we're just going to hit it. Query entities is not a function. So I think I already know why we're getting this. It's because we're not exporting the query entities. So let's just copy this. We'll say exports dot query entities equals query entities. Go ahead and save it. We'll have to relaunch our debugger. And then I will go ahead and hit it. Argument is out of range. Internal server error. Argument is out of range. So this is one of the great things about Azure Functions is that what we can do is just set a breakpoint, and then we'll step through it and see exactly where we're getting our error. See if the blogs pass through. So we get diligent dev. Okay, let's step into query entities. Table query. Oh, I think I know what's causing this. When you do a query, you can do a continuation token, and we're putting our options where the continuation token should be. So if we hover, let me just stop the debugger. Let's hover over query entities and look at the properties it takes. So it takes a table query, and then it's going to look for a continuation token and then your options. So what we need to do is specify null here. Go ahead and save that. Relaunch our debugger. And then we will fire off our request. And I'm just going to let it run. We'll come back and see what we get. And there we go. So we've got all of our posts. We see that we have the partition key, our row key. It does pass back a timestamp. So there's no need to do any created date on these. We have a title and our content. So that looks really good right now. So the next thing I want to do is work on getting a specific post. So if we head back to the Azure tab, we'll go to our functions. We're going to click the little lightning bolt with a plus sign. We'll do an HTTP trigger. We'll name this one get post. We will set the authorization level to anonymous. I'm going to head back to our file explorer. We're going to go to the get post, and we're going to go to the function.json. And what we're going to do is just remove the post method. We're going to specify the route again. Say route. And then I'm going to replace this with get post / brackets. We'll pass the blog. And in addition to the blog, I'm going to do another / and we're going to say ID. So we're going to be passing, this will be the partition key and this will be the row key so that we can get a single record. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then I'm going to head back to the index.js and we'll go ahead and remove all of this. And we'll wrap everything in a try catch. I'm going to go ahead and cut the context res. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste it here and also paste it here. We'll do the exact same thing where we set this to a 500 and return the error.message. And then up here, we'll just go ahead and get rid of this for now. Up the top, we will get Azure. So we'll say const Azure equals require Azure storage. And then we're going to import the query entities again. Inside of the try block, we'll say const, we'll do some object destructuring. We'll say blog and ID equals context.binding data. Then we'll create our query. We'll say const query equals new Azure table query. And we're going to say where partition key equals question mark and row key equals question mark. And then we're passing in the blog. We also have the ID, but it's an integer. So we need to make it a string. So we'll just say toString. Then we'll say const result equals query entities, posts, and our query. And then what we'll do is we'll just return the result. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. We'll head back over here. And now we need to pass in the blog and then one of our row keys. Hit send. And connection was refused, and that's because we never actually ran the debugger in our local server. So let's give it a second to spin up here. And we will send that off, and we get a 404 not found, and that's because I need to take the S off of this, so this needs to be get post. So we'll send it again. And now we see we get this value array, and inside of that, we get our specific post that we were looking for. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is work on updating a post. So to do that, what I'm gonna do is actually go to the File Explorer. I'm just gonna close all these out, and then we're gonna head over to the Azure tab, and underneath Functions, we'll click our little lightning bolt here. We'll do an HTTP trigger. We're gonna say update post, and we will make it anonymous. And then we'll go back to the File Explorer. We will find our update post folder. We'll go to the function.json. And inside of methods, we can go ahead and replace the get with a put, and then go ahead and delete this out. Next, what we can do is specify the route. Now the route's going to be very similar to our get post because we need to grab a specific post inside of our storage table. So we're going to say route, and then we're going to say update post /blog /ID. Next, we'll head over to our table client or our table service, and we're going to write a new method. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a look at the Azure documentation. So there are a few ways to update an entity. You can either replace it, you can merge, you can insert or replace, or you insert or merge. Now what we're going to be doing is merging the identity, but any of these would be applicable. So we're going to head back over here, and I'm just going to say const update entity equals, we'll pass in the table name and the entity, and then we're going to return a promise just like we have in the other methods. And we'll do table service dot update entity, and we're going to pass it the table name and the entity, and then we get our function back from it. And inside of here, we will reject if we get an error, and if we resolve, there's nothing to actually pass back. It doesn't give you anything back, so we're just going to resolve it without passing a body back. Looks like I might have missed that. And then what we'll do is export this. So we'll say exports dot update entity equals update entity. And we'll go ahead and save that. Next, we'll come back to our index.js inside of our update post, and we need to import that method that we created in the table service. So we'll say const update entity, and that will set equal to require. We are up 1 to services, and then table service. Then we'll go ahead and remove all of this. We will wrap everything in a try catch. I'm going to take this, put it here, and also paste it in there. We will change this to a 500, and we will pass back error.message. Go ahead and remove this comment as well. In this context res, we can go ahead and just remove the 200. Actually, we don't need to pass back anything because we have nothing to pass back and it automatically defaults to a 200. So we don't need to put anything in there, but we're gonna use some checks here. If we're updating, we need a body on our request. So we're gonna say if rec.body is nothing, then we're going to pass back a context res. We will set this to a 400, and then we will set the body equal to please pass request body. And then we also need to return out of this. Then outside of that if block, we'll go ahead and grab the title and content from the request body. So we'll say title, content equals rec.body. And we're also going to check to see that at least one of these is passed. So if we don't have a title and we also don't have content, we're going to pass back a context res with a status of 400 and please pass title or content, and we'll return out of that. So no need to update it if we don't have those two things. Then we need to grab the blog and the ID out of our binding data. So we're going to say const blog ID equals context.binding data. And then we're going to say const entity equals, we will pass the partition key, which is the blog. We'll also pass the row key, which is the ID. And just like the last method, we need to cast this to a string. And then we also need to check to see what has been passed in. So if we have a title, we're going to set the entity.title to the title that we're passing in. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of these so we can put that on one line. And we'll check if we have content. We'll set the entity.content to the content that's passed in. And then we'll just say await update entity. We will pass in that we want the post table, and we'll also pass in the entity. So we'll go ahead and save that. And then what I'm going to do is go back to Thunder Client. I'm going to pull up this last request that we made. I'm going to, instead of get post, we're going to say update post. Then we need to pass in a body. And I'm going to first pass in, let's just pass in the title. I need to wrap this in quotes. And I'm going to grab the title of this. And we'll say, my first blog post updated. We will launch our debugger. And then we will change this to a put. So we have our put, update post, blog ID. Let's go ahead and hit it and see what happens. Binding data of undefined. So let's go see why we have that. Content, we need context. And I'm sure I did that somewhere else. Nope. So we'll go ahead and save this. Launch our debugger again, go back to Thunder client, hit it again. Table service.update entity is not a function. So let's go back to our table service, update entity, update entity.
A few moments later.
Okay, so this is where I messed up. This is not supposed to be update entity. This is supposed to be merge entity. All right, let's go ahead and save this. Let's relaunch our debugger. Go back here. Run it. All right, we got a 200 back, finally. And then if we go back to the Azure Storage Explorer, we see that our title has been updated. Now let's try to update the content. So I'm just gonna grab this. So if you double click on an entity in here, you can just go ahead and grab the content. And I'm just gonna go ahead and say content, paste this in, updated, and then we'll send that. We get a 200 back. So if I come back here and I refresh, we see my first blog post updated. And then if we come back and let's do title and content to make sure that works. Got to wrap this in quotes. Let's go ahead and pass this in, and we'll remove the updated, and we will send it, and it looks like we got a 200. So if we come back here, exit out of this, refresh, my first blog post, and both the updates are gone out of that. So that is looking really good right now. Okay, so the last thing we're gonna do is our delete method. So let's head back over to the File Explorer. I'm just gonna go ahead and close all of these. We'll head back to the Azure tab, click the little icon there, HTTP trigger, delete post. We'll do anonymous. We will head back. We will find our delete post. We'll go to the function.json. We're going to replace this get method with a delete, and then we will get rid of the post. Then what we're going to do is specify our route. So we're going to say route, and we're going to set it equal to delete post. And then we're going to pass in our blog. I got to wrap that. And we're also going to pass in the ID. Next, we're going to save this and head back to our table service. We're going to create another method called delete entity. We'll pass in the table name and the entity, and then we will wrap everything in a promise. We'll pass in the resolve and reject. We're going to do table service.delete entity, and I'll hover over it to make sure it's an actual method off of our table service now. And we see that we pass in the table and the entity. And then if we get an error, we will reject with the error. And if we don't get an error, we will resolve it. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then we're going to, well, I should have exported it before I saved it. So we're going to say exports delete entity equals delete entity. Save that again. Then we will head over to our index.js, and that's in the update. We need it in the deletes. All right. We will go ahead and get rid of all this. Wrap everything in a try catch again. Cut that, paste it in the try, or actually we don't need anything in the try block because it defaults to a 200 and we don't pass anything in the body. But, whoa, inside of our catch block, we will do a status of 500 and pass back the error message. In the try block, actually what we need to do first is we need to pass in our delete entity. So we're going to say const delete entity equals require, not request idle callback, require, and we'll pass it the table service. And then inside of our binding data, we need to grab the blog and the ID. So we're going to say blog ID equal context not content, dot binding data. And then we'll just do await, or actually not yet. We need to make our entity. We're going to say const entity. I'm going to pass in the partition key of the blog and then the row key of the id.toString. And then we can do our await, delete entity, pass it the post table and our entity. And you'll notice that we don't need to specify the content, the title, all that stuff. All we need to do is specify the partition key and the row key because those need to be unique for every record inside of our storage tables. So all I'm going to do is save this. We're going to go back to Thunder clients. I'm just going to go ahead and open up one of our old ones. I'm going to do, let's do delete post in here. And then we have the partition key and our row key, and we will change this to a delete. I need to actually run our debugger. And something happened. Okay, looks like I may have messed something up inside of here. I missed a bracket right there on the blog. So we'll go ahead and save that. All right, we've relaunched the debugger. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to run our delete. And it looks like it deleted it. So if we go back to the Storage Explorer, it should have deleted this first post right here. So if we refresh, and our first post is gone. So there you have it. We've created a REST API with CRUD functionality. We've created a post. We can get all posts for a blog, get a specific post, update a post, and delete a post. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for part 2. In part 3, we're going to look at refactoring some things, making our API more streamlined and more like a typical REST API. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so that you're notified when that new video comes out. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns on this video, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section below. And until next time, happy coding.